Good day and welcome to my channel. The sun was already casting a warm gold across the morning sky as Elvina Bruce stepped into her lecture hall, heels clicking confidently against the polished floors. She didn't need to look up to know that the room would fall silent. Her presence always did that. Not out of fear, but respect. She was brilliant, bold, and beautiful in a way that felt entirely unintentional. Her black curls were pulled into a soft bun, her makeup flawless but subtle, and her dark brown eyes scanned the hall with familiar ease. A navy blue blouse hugged her figure just enough to remind them she was more than a professor, she was a woman. One who had learned how to build walls no one could climb. "Good morning," she said simply, placing her laptop on the desk. "Let's dive in." As the projector hummed to life, she noticed him again. The boy. The one who always sat in the back row. David Wayne. She didn't know his name yet, not really. On her register, he was just Wayne David, enrolled with near-perfect attendance and an average that made her raise her brow more than once. He was quiet. Unassuming. But there was something about the way he watched her, intensely, but respectfully. Eyes that weren't hungry, but curious. As though he knew something the others didn't. And perhaps, he did. David had secrets. He had everything, money, legacy, luxury, but none of it felt real in the same way that she did. He'd walked away from boardrooms and country clubs to sit in her classroom, hidden behind a modest scholarship application and a student identity he crafted with quiet precision. It started as a dare to himself. Could he survive the real world without his last name? Could he be seen, really seen, not as Wayne Enterprises' heir, but as someone, ordinary? And then he saw her. Professor Elvina Bruce. Not just intelligent, she was mesmerizing. She spoke with fire and lived with restraint. It was in the way she sipped her coffee, how her lips curved into a smirk when students tried to challenge her. She made him feel something he hadn't in years, humbled. He wanted to be near her. He didn't expect to fall. David sat still in the last row of the lecture hall, his pen twirling slowly between his fingers. He wasn't taking notes, he didn't need to. He could recall every word Elvina said. Her lectures weren't just informative, they were captivating. She didn't teach from a script. She taught like she believed in what she was saying, with passion, with precision, with poetry. Today, she was talking about behavioral economics and identity in financial markets. But to David, every word she said felt like a challenge, not to his intellect, but to his composure. The way she paced, how she clicked her remote with soft confidence, how her voice dipped when she made a clever point, it all left him disarmed. And yet, despite the spell she cast, she hadn't even noticed him. Not really. David didn't want to be noticed the way other students were. He didn't want a grade boost or special attention. He wanted her to see him, not Wayne Enterprises, not the wealth, not the legacy. Just the man behind the mask. And she would. But not yet. When the class ended, students stood and packed their books in the usual buzz of bodies and movement. Some lingered around her desk, mostly guys, eager to earn smiles or validation. Elvina answered their questions politely, but she wasn't one for small talk. David didn't move. He waited. She eventually gathered her tablet, locked her screen, and stepped toward the door. As she passed the back row, her eyes flickered to him. Just for a second. There it was. That subtle spark of recognition. But she kept walking. He didn't smile, didn't speak. Not yet. Later that evening. The glass of wine trembled slightly in his hand as David leaned on the railing of his penthouse balcony, 20 stories above the glowing city. The view was magnificent. Towers bathed in amber light, traffic flickering like blood through veins, but it meant nothing to him tonight. His thoughts were still in that lecture hall. Still with her. "I can't keep pretending," he muttered to himself. Behind him, the hum of his assistant's voice carried through the speakerphone on the kitchen island. David, you missed today's board update. Your father asked about the new acquisition strategy. I told him you were in class. He didn't laugh. David sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Tell him I'll send a report tonight. And cancel the Dubai trip. I'm not leaving this semester. The assistant hesitated. You're still pretending to be a broke student, aren't you? I'm not pretending, David said quietly. I'm learning. I'm watching. I'm in love with the lecturer, she finished for him, amused. He didn't deny it. He just sipped the wine and whispered, she doesn't even know my name. The next day, Elvina poured her coffee slowly, the rich aroma fogging her thoughts. She hadn't slept well. There was something unsettling about yesterday's class. Not unpleasant, just different. That student in the back row, David, she thought his name was, he'd looked at her like he saw right through her. Not in the creepy way. In the unsettling way. As if he could see the things she worked so hard to bury. The heartbreaks. The walls. The woman underneath the poise. She scowled, shaking it off. Don't be ridiculous, Elvina. He's just a kid. A student. A quiet one. She hated that her mind even went there. She packed her things and walked out, heels echoing down the corridor. It was the way he spoke, not loud or arrogant like most of her students, but with a kind of quiet certainty, that made her stop mid-sentence. Elvina turned slightly, her eyes scanning the sea of faces in the lecture hall until they found the source. David Wayne. He had never spoken before. Never raised his hand. Never even looked like he wanted to. Until today. He was still in the back row, still a shadow among students. But now, he was standing. His posture was relaxed but focused, his eyes steady on hers. There's a flaw in the way market assumptions are applied to emotional spending, he said clearly. It's not always about irrationality. Sometimes people know what they're doing, they just don't care about logic in the moment. A few students turned, murmuring. She couldn't tell if they were surprised by the insight or by the fact that he was the one saying it. Elvina folded her arms, intrigued despite herself. You're suggesting that irrational spending can be a conscious choice? David gave a small nod. Sometimes we buy feelings, not things. A brief silence fell between them. And for the first time, she truly looked at him. His face was sharply defined, not boyish like many of the students around him. There was a calm confidence there, and something in his eyes, something careful, intentional. She could feel her professional wall rising instinctively. I see, she said coolly, turning back to her screen. We'll explore that next week. But something inside her had shifted. Later that afternoon, David leaned back against a campus bench, his phone resting in his hand but untouched. He'd done it. He'd spoken to her. Not outside of class, not as himself, but it was a start. He could still feel the moment in his chest, the electricity of her eyes finding his and holding them for just a beat too long. He hadn't imagined the way she looked at him. Curious. Disarmed. Maybe even impressed. He smiled slightly to himself, tapping the phone screen. There were dozens of unread messages from his assistant and several missed calls from his father. The Wayne board was having a crisis in procurement. Stocks were dipping. Global partners needed updates. David closed the phone. He didn't care. He looked out across the campus as students passed, some in groups, others alone. He had money. Power. Influence. But right now, the only thing he wanted was to hear her voice again. Elvina's office. She was staring at the ceiling. The lights were off. The only illumination came from the sunlight filtering through the blinds. Elvina sat behind her desk with a pen in one hand and a closed file in the other. She wasn't grading papers. She hadn't been for a while. All she could think about was that student. David Wayne. There was nothing inappropriate about what he said. Nothing about the moment that crossed any formal boundary. But it still felt strange. And it wasn't just what he said. It was how he said it. The clarity. The depth. The deliberate restraint. It felt like speaking to someone who was watching the world differently, someone who saw her, even when she wasn't trying to be seen. And Elvina hated being seen. It was dangerous. She reached for her coffee cup and realized it was empty. With a sigh, she stood, brushing herself off and heading toward the door. But in her chest, something restless stirred. That evening, David paced the polished floors of his penthouse, barefoot and deep in thought. Jazz music played low in the background, the notes flowing softly between glass walls and leather furnishings. He stopped at his desk, opened his laptop, and stared at her file on the screen. He had it. Of course he did. Everything about Elvina Bruce was publicly available if you knew where to look. She had studied at the University of Chicago. Published a paper on identity and emotional bias in market behavior. Her father was an economist. Her mother had passed away 5 years ago. No siblings. Her life was clean. Predictable. Private. But he didn't want her past. He wanted her present. Her now. Her laughter, her frown, her guarded heart and everything she never said aloud. But he also knew, one wrong move, one misplaced word, and she would shut him out forever. He had to be careful. Calculated. Patient. And that was the problem. He was in love. And patience had never been his strength. The coffee shop near the campus library always smelled like cinnamon and toasted bread. Students flocked to it for a quick caffeine fix, but Elvina came here for silence. Or at least she used to. Today, she couldn't seem to find peace anywhere. She stirred her cappuccino absent-mindedly, her eyes scanning the headlines on her phone, not actually reading them. Everything felt like static noise. Her mind was elsewhere, still caught in the ripple of David Wayne's voice. Why did it stick with her? Why did his words echo long after the class had ended? She looked up and blinked. He was there. David Wayne. As if summoned by her thoughts, he stepped into the cafe wearing a dark Henley shirt and jeans, carrying a leather-bound notebook under his arm. He looked effortlessly out of place, too composed, too poised to be just another undergrad. Their eyes met. He hesitated. So did she. Then, without breaking their gaze, David walked toward her. "Good morning, Professor," he said gently, stopping beside her table. "Mind if I join you?" Every warning bell in her mind blared at once. She should say no. She should remind him of boundaries. But she didn't. Instead, she motioned to the empty chair across from her. "You don't seem like the coffee shop type," she said as he sat down. David gave a small smile. "You don't seem like the distracted type." "Touché." She tilted her head, sipping slowly. "What brings you here?" He shrugged. "Habit. Anne. I was hoping I'd see you again." The words landed gently, like a feather, but they made her spine straighten. "That's a bold thing to say to your lecturer," she said carefully, searching his eyes. "I meant it respectfully," David replied, voice low but clear. "I know there's a line. I'm not trying to cross it." "Then what are you trying to do?" she asked, leaning slightly forward. David didn't hesitate. "Understand you." Elvina blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity in his voice. "I'm not a puzzle to solve, Mr. Wayne." "No," he agreed. "You're a story. I'm just reading." She looked away, fighting the twitch of a smile. No student had ever spoken to her like that, like she was something seen, not just heard. Later that night. David's driver had left hours ago. He didn't want the Bentley drawing attention. Tonight, he walked. The sky was indigo velvet, and the city buzzed quietly beneath it. He slipped through shadows, unnoticed, just another student cutting across campus. But his mind was anything but calm. He replayed the conversation over and over again. Her voice. Her questions. Her restraint. She was beautiful, but that wasn't what pulled him in. It was how she looked at the world, like she was both surviving it and outrunning it. Like she'd been broken before and glued the pieces back in all the wrong places just to stay standing. And somehow, he wanted to be part of whatever kept her whole. But he couldn't tell her the truth. Not yet. Because if she knew who he really was, she'd walk away without looking back. Meanwhile, across town, Elvina was in bed, but not asleep. The light from her bedside lamp painted the pages of the book she wasn't really reading. She couldn't stop thinking about him. David Wayne. There was something about him that unsettled her. Not just his intellect, but the way he studied her. Like he saw too much. Like he'd already decided she was worth figuring out. And it had been so long since someone had looked at her like that. She turned the page of her book but didn't register a single word. Instead, her mind whispered a question she didn't want to answer. What if this isn't just curiosity? What if it's dangerous? Elvina had never liked office hours. Not because she didn't care about her students, quite the opposite. But most didn't show up to talk about the material. They came for favors, grade negotiations, or, worse, flattery masked as academic curiosity. Today, though, she was uncharacteristically anxious. Every knock on her office door made her pulse quicken. She knew he might come. And part of her wanted him to. At 3:17 p.m., there was a quiet knock. She didn't look up right away. Just said, "Come in." The door creaked open, and she knew even before he spoke. "Hi, Professor Bruce." David. Her eyes lifted slowly from her laptop. He stood in the doorway, not with the arrogance of someone chasing attention, but the restraint of someone who knew he already had it. "David," she replied calmly. "I didn't expect you." "I wasn't sure I'd come," he said honestly. "But I figured, we left a few things unsaid." She gestured to the seat across from her desk. "Then sit." He did, quietly, placing his notebook on his lap but never opening it. Elvina crossed her arms. "So, what exactly are we discussing today, class material or something, less academic?" David smirked faintly but didn't take the bait. "I came to ask a question." She arched a brow. "Go on." He leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on the desk's edge. "Why do you do it?" "Do what?" "This," he said, gesturing lightly. "The walls. The silence. The way you keep everyone at arm's length." Elvina blinked, caught off guard. She'd expected flirting. Maybe a subtle compliment. Not a direct probe into the very core of her defense. "That's an inappropriate question," she said coolly. "Maybe," David replied. "But it's an honest one." She leaned back. "And what makes you think you're entitled to honesty from me?" David met her gaze, unflinching. "Because I gave you mine." The room fell into a charged silence. He wasn't playing a game. He wasn't pushing for something physical. He was asking to be seen. And that terrified her. Later that night, she didn't sleep. She replayed their conversation on a loop, his eyes, his voice, the quiet confidence that somehow didn't feel like a threat. She hated that she cared what he thought. Hated that she was questioning herself because of him. Across town, David stood at his window again, wine glass untouched. He hadn't expected to say what he said. It came out too fast, too raw. But it was true. He wanted to know her. The real her. Not the title. Not the power. Just Elvina. And if that meant risking his secret. Maybe he was ready. But would she forgive him? The sound of chalk against the board was the only noise in the room. Elvina wrote slowly, deliberately, her handwriting clean and exact, a reflection of the order she tried so hard to maintain in a life that often felt like chaos on the inside. Behind her, students were unusually silent. She didn't need to look to know why. He was there. David. Even without turning around, she could feel the gravity of his presence in the room, not just as a student, but as something else now. Something unresolved. She finished writing the equation, placed the chalk down, and finally turned. Her eyes swept across the room, and then landed on his. He was watching her again. Not like a boy smitten with a crush, but like a man quietly wrestling with a decision that might change everything. She had dismissed the class with a simple, "We'll continue this next week," and gathered her things quickly, hoping to slip out unnoticed. But fate, as always, had other plans. Professor Bruce. She froze. His voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. She turned, slowly. David stood a few feet away, holding his notebook in one hand, the other tucked into his pocket. His expression was unreadable. "Yes," she said. He hesitated. "Can I walk with you?" She studied him for a moment, then nodded once. "Fine." Outside the campus path. They walked in silence for a while, the only sound the soft crunch of leaves underfoot and the distant chatter of other students heading home. David finally spoke. "You seemed off today." "I'm allowed to have off days," she said quietly. "I didn't say you weren't. I just noticed." She said nothing. "I didn't mean to push you." "The other day," he continued. "In your office." "You didn't push," she replied. "You peeled." David looked at her. "What?" She stopped walking and turned to face him. "You peeled something open that wasn't meant to be touched. And I'm still deciding if I want to close it back." He didn't smile. Didn't flinch. He just nodded once. "I respect that," he said. She turned back and started walking again. This time, he followed at a gentler pace. That night at Elvina's apartment. She stared at her phone for a long time before finally typing his name into the search bar. Nothing came up. No social media. No mentions in student forums. Not even a casual event photo. It was strange. In a world where everyone was everywhere, David Wayne was invisible. And that scared her more than she wanted to admit. That night, at David's penthouse. David stood in his walk-in closet, staring at a row of custom-tailored suits, watches that cost more than tuition, and a family crest engraved on a mahogany box. His assistant had left a note on the kitchen counter. "Your father wants you back in the boardroom before the next quarter." He picked up the note, tore it in half, and dropped it without a word. He wasn't ready. Not to leave. Not to lie. Not to lose her. The soft rumble of thunder rolled through the late afternoon sky as Elvina closed her umbrella and stepped inside the administrative building. Her heels echoed against the marble floor, her thoughts louder than the sound. She hadn't seen David in 3 days. Not in class. Not on campus. Not even in her peripheral vision. And she hated that she noticed. She hated even more how much she missed his silence, his presence, his calm watchfulness. She tried to rationalize it. "He's just a student. You barely know him." But her gut wouldn't let it go. Something about him didn't add up. Something was off. And it wasn't just attraction anymore. It was suspicion. Meanwhile at an uptown, private lounge. David sat in the quietest corner of his father's club, blazer off, tie loosened. His fingers ran across the rim of a crystal glass, untouched scotch melting slowly in the low light. His grandfather, Chief Wayne, leaned back across the table, brows furrowed. "You're distracted," the older man said plainly. David didn't deny it. "I'm in love with her." The chief scoffed. "And still pretending to be poor while chasing her in a classroom? Do you think that will end well?" David looked up, eyes sharp. "It's not about money. I needed her to see me, the man, not the name. The way the world sees Wayne, isn't who I am." Chief Wayne leaned in. "And what happens when she finds out you lied?" David stared into the amber glass. "I don't know," he admitted softly. That evening at Elvina's apartment. She stood at her window, phone in hand, thumb hovering over a text she hadn't sent. "Are you okay?" She erased it. Rewrote it. "Just checking in." Deleted that too. What was she doing? He wasn't her boyfriend. He wasn't even a friend, really. He was a student. And yet, when he looked at her, it felt like being seen in a way she hadn't been in years. A part of her wanted to protect that feeling. The other part wanted to run from it. The lecture hall was half full when David walked in. Quiet. Unapologetic. Confident as ever. Elvina didn't see him until she turned around mid-lecture. Her voice faltered for the briefest second. Then she continued, pretending nothing had shifted. But he saw the flicker in her eyes. After class, he waited. She didn't ask him to leave. Instead, she said, "You've been gone." David nodded. "I needed space." "To do what?" "To decide if I'm brave enough to be honest." That made her stop. "Honest about what?" He smiled, gently. "About how I feel." Elvina stared at him, emotion storming just beneath her surface. "You shouldn't say that," she whispered. "Why?" "Because once you do, I can't unhear it." Elvina didn't want to be touched, not physically, not emotionally. But somehow, David Wayne had found a way to reach her without laying a finger on her. And that frightened her more than she cared to admit. She stood on the edge of something raw and unfamiliar, and she wasn't sure whether she wanted to step forward or run back. Because when he said it, "I needed time to decide if I'm brave enough to be honest," her heart didn't skip a beat like it did in romance novels. It clenched. Because she'd been here before. And last time, it broke her. The parcel came without a note. Delivered to her office. Wrapped in black ribbon. No branding. No card. Just a velvet box. Elvina hesitated. Then opened it. Inside was a delicate silver necklace. Simple. Beautiful. Quietly expensive. She stared at it for a long time before closing the box and setting it aside. Later that day, she saw him in class. He didn't mention it. Didn't even glance at her longer than he had to. But as the lecture ended and students filed out, she approached him. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. David looked at her. "I didn't do it because I had to." "Why now?" "Because I needed you to know how I feel, without saying it again." Elvina shook her head slightly, conflicted. "You can't keep doing this." "I won't," he said. That was the last thing. No more gestures. Just truth. She nodded, lips parting like she wanted to say more, but didn't. Across town, Chief Wayne sat with his son, David's father, in the family estate. "Does he really plan to marry this woman as a student?" his father asked. Chief Wayne exhaled deeply. "I don't think he plans on staying a student much longer." "And when she finds out who he is?" The older man simply said, "Then we'll see if she loves the boy, or the billionaire." David walked Elvina to her car after class, neither of them saying much. But just before she opened her door, he reached out, stopping just short of touching her hand. "I want to tell you everything," he said. Elvina turned, lips trembling. Then why don't you? Because I don't want to lose you before I've really had you. A long pause. Then she looked at him, not as her student, but as the man who might already have her heart. You're holding something back, she whispered. And I don't know how long I can keep walking towards someone who's standing still. Elvina hadn't worn the necklace. It stayed in its box on her bedside table, haunting her like a question she couldn't answer. Each time she reached for it, something stopped her, something that whispered, "It's too soon. It's not real." But deep down, she knew the gift was real. Just like the feelings behind it. And that scared her more than anything. David stood at the rooftop edge of his penthouse, wind catching the hem of his white shirt as the city lights flickered beneath him. In his hand, he held a thick ivory envelope stamped with gold. The Wayne Foundation Annual Ball. He never cared for these events. Suits, speeches, and fake smiles. But this year would be different. This year, he wanted her there. He just didn't know how to ask without revealing everything. His phone buzzed. "Chief Wayne, bring her. Or don't come at all." David stared at the message for a long time. Then typed back, "She doesn't know yet." The reply came instantly. Then it's time she did. Elvina found David waiting outside her office. He wasn't wearing his usual student look, he looked different. Polished. Intentional. "I need a favor," he said. She arched an eyebrow. "Is it about class?" "No," he admitted. "It's personal." She leaned against the doorframe. "That's dangerous territory." He smiled slightly. "I'd like you to come somewhere with me this weekend. Just one night. It's formal." Elvina blinked. "Like a date? Like a reveal?" She tilted her head. "You said you wanted to be honest." David's eyes held hers. "This is me trying." She hesitated. Then nodded slowly. "Fine. One night." The hotel ballroom was nothing short of breathtaking, gold chandeliers, glass floors, and a ceiling painted with constellations. Elvina stepped in, heels clicking softly on marble, her black satin gown clinging to her in all the right ways. She'd never felt so out of place. And then she saw him. David, not the student, but the man. In a bespoke tuxedo, speaking to reporters, shaking hands with Nigeria's elite, laughing with CEOs and dignitaries. It was like watching a prince in his palace. Her heart stopped. He caught her gaze from across the room and walked straight to her. "Elvina," he said, voice gentle in contrast to the grandeur around them. "You lied to me," she whispered. "I hid," he corrected. "Because I needed you to see me before you saw all this." The silence between them was louder than the music. David stood in front of her, tuxedo immaculate, expression calm but laced with panic beneath the surface. Elvina, wrapped in elegance and heartbreak, couldn't breathe. Around them, laughter echoed. Cameras flashed. Glasses clinked. But none of that reached her. All she could see was him, the man she thought she was beginning to trust, now dressed in truth she didn't ask for. "You're David Wayne," she said at last, voice low and trembling. He nodded slowly. "I am." She took a step back. "As in Wayne Enterprises. The Wayne Foundation. The family that owns half of Lagos?" "Yes." Elvina's jaw clenched. "You lied to me." "No," he said gently. "I hid." "That's the same thing." Suddenly, all the things she couldn't explain about him came rushing back. The polished way he spoke. The moments he seemed too composed. The mysterious phone calls. The missing digital footprint. The expensive car he claimed wasn't his. She hadn't wanted to see it before. But now. Now it was blinding. Outside the ballroom. She stepped out into the night air, heels clicking across marble, each step faster than the last. David followed. "Elvina, please," he said. "Don't walk away." "I don't know who you are," she cried, turning on him. "All this time. You let me believe you were someone else. Someone ordinary." "I wanted you to see me," he said, voice breaking. "Not my name. Not my bank account. Just me." "You say that like it's noble," she said bitterly. "But it's manipulation." He flinched. "I was falling for you," she whispered. "And now I don't know if any of it was real." Back at her apartment hours later. Elvina stood in her bedroom, the necklace finally in her hand. It glinted in the moonlight. She held it tight. And then let it fall to the floor. Chief Wayne was furious. "I told you," he spat. "I warned you. What were you thinking?" David stood silent in the center of the study. "I love her," he said finally. His father scoffed. "Then you should have told her the truth." David's voice broke. "I was afraid she'd stop loving me the moment she knew." Elvina didn't answer his calls. She didn't reply to his texts. She didn't even open the card that arrived at her office days later with flowers she never asked for. She was done with secrets. And yet, she wasn't done with him. Because love doesn't vanish just because truth arrives late. Every night she stared at the necklace on the floor, unwilling to pick it up, unable to throw it away. Every morning she told herself she was over him. And every morning, she lied. 3 weeks later. It was her mother who finally said what Elvina needed to hear. Sitting across from her in the garden, peeling oranges. "You loved him," her mother said simply. Elvina didn't answer. "You still do." A pause. "But he lied." Another pause. "And people lie. Sometimes out of fear. Sometimes out of love. You have to decide which one he did it for." Elvina looked up, tears in her eyes. "How do I forgive someone for making me fall in love with a ghost?" Her mother smiled, soft and sad. "You forgive the ghost, when you see the man behind it is real." Meanwhile, David waits. David sat in the back of the small university auditorium. Not in class. Not as a student. Just, watching. Elvina walked in, dressed in quiet strength. She hadn't changed. But she had. She saw him as she walked past. Their eyes met. He stood. She didn't stop him this time. They stood in the corridor. Quiet. No one else around. David reached into his pocket and pulled out the necklace. "I picked it up," he said. "The night you dropped it." Elvina said nothing. "I kept thinking if I showed up again, it'd scare you away. But I didn't know what else to do." "Then why are you here?" "To give it back. And to ask if I can earn you, not your trust, not your love, just you." She looked at him. Hard. Long. And then. She stepped closer. "I'm not giving you easy," she said. "I'm not asking for easy," he replied. She took the necklace. "I still hate you," she added. "I'd be worried if you didn't." Then, slowly, cautiously, she reached for his hand. Not fully. Not yet. But enough to say, "I'm not done." Thanks for watching. Part 2 is coming up later.